as she walked into the party in torn clothes, and the millionaire couldn't take his eyes off her. The room was buzzing with laughter, clinking glasses, and the kind of energy that only a high society party could muster. Crystal chandeliers cast shimmering light across the grand hall, reflecting off designer dresses and tailored suits. It was the kind of event where everyone seemed to be competing for attention, until she walked in. Her entrance wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't need to be. She simply stepped through the door, her torn clothes catching every eye in the room. Whispers rippled like waves through the crowd. Who was she? Why did she look so out of place? And why, despite everything, couldn't anyone stop staring at her? In the corner of the room stood Alexander Drake, one of the wealthiest men in the city. His sharp suit and commanding presence made him easy to spot, even from across the vast space. He had seen countless women walk into parties like this over the years, elegant, polished, flawless, but something about her stopped him cold. It wasn't just the torn jeans and faded jacket that set her apart. There was something in the way she carried herself, as if she didn't care what anyone thought, but somehow knew they were all watching. Anyway, for a moment, time seemed to freeze. The hum of conversation faded into the background, and all he could focus on was her. Her name was Clara, though no one there knew it yet. To most people in the room, she was an enigma, a puzzle waiting to be solved. Some whispered that she must have wandered in by mistake, while others speculated she was making some sort of bold fashion statement. But Clara wasn't trying to make a statement. She hadn't planned to come here at all. Life had thrown her a curveball earlier that day, leaving her with little choice but to show up exactly as she was. Yet there was a quiet confidence in her eyes, a resilience that hinted at a story far deeper than anyone could guess. Alexander found himself drawn to her almost instinctively. Normally, he avoided these kinds of distractions. At 37, he'd built his empire through discipline and focus, rarely letting anything or anyone distract him from his goals. But tonight was different. As he watched her move through the crowd, ignoring the sideways glances and hushed comments, he felt a pull he couldn't explain. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was admiration, or maybe it was something more primal, something he hadn't felt in years. Whatever it was, it refused to let go. Clara, for her part, wasn't oblivious to the stares or the whispers. She heard them, of course, but she chose not to let them bother her. She'd spent too much of her life caring about what other people thought, and tonight, she decided, would be different. Still, she couldn't help but notice the man in the corner, the one who seemed to be watching her more intently than anyone else. There was something magnetic about him, a presence that demanded attention, without demanding anything at all. When their eyes finally met across the crowded room, it sent a jolt through her system. It was fleeting, just a split second, but it was enough to leave her unsettled. As the night wore on, the atmosphere grew heavier, with unspoken questions. People began to speculate openly, their voices rising above the music. "Who does she think she is?" one woman muttered, under her breath, clutching her champagne flute a little too tightly. Another guest leaned in, whispering conspiratorially about how someone should tell security to escort her out, but no one dared approach her directly. There was something about Clara that kept them at bay, a quiet strength that warned against crossing her. Even Alexander, who prided himself on his ability to read people, found himself unsure of what to do next. For all his wealth and influence, Alexander wasn't used to feeling uncertain. He thrived in situations where he held the upper hand, where he could predict outcomes and control variables. But Clara defied categorization. She didn't fit neatly into any box. and that intrigued him more than he cared to admit. He wanted to know her story, not because he pitied her, but because he sensed there was more to her than met the eye. Was she running from something, fighting for something, or was she simply tired of playing by everyone else's rules? The possibilities swirled in his mind, each one pulling him closer to her. Meanwhile, Clara navigated the sea of judgmental gazes with a mix of defiance and grace. She knew she didn't belong here, not in this world of glittering surfaces and hidden agendas. Yet there was a strange thrill in being the outsider, in proving to herself that she could hold her ground even when the odds were stacked against her. Every step she took felt like a small act of rebellion, a reminder that she didn't need anyone's approval to exist. But as the minutes ticked by, she started to wonder, what was she doing here? Why had fate led her to this moment? And what was she supposed to learn from it? Just when it seemed like the tension in the room couldn't get any thicker, something unexpected happened. A server carrying a tray of drinks stumbled, spilling red wine onto the pristine white carpet. The commotion drew everyone's attention, including Clara's and Alexander's. For a brief moment, the spell was broken, and the room returned to its usual rhythm. But as Clara turned to leave, sensing that she'd overstayed her welcome, she felt a hand gently touch her arm. Startled, she looked up to find Alexander standing there, his expression unreadable. "I don't think we've met," he said, his voice smooth and measured. "I'm Alexander." Clara hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Something about the way he said his name, confident yet oddly vulnerable, made her pause. She could feel the weight of his gaze, the intensity behind his words. Part of her wanted to brush him off, to keep moving forward without looking back. But another part, the part that had been searching for answers all night, wondered if this chance encounter might be more than just coincidence. Before she could decide what to say, the sound of raised voices echoed from the other side of the room. A heated argument had broken out between two guests, drawing everyone's attention once again. In the chaos, Clara slipped away, disappearing into the crowd before Alexander could stop her. Frustrated but undeterred, he scanned the room, determined to find her. Little did he know, their paths were destined to cross again. And when they did, nothing would ever be the same. As the camera pans out, capturing the glittering aftermath of the party, one question lingers in the air. Who is Clara really? And why does she seem to hold such power over a man who has everything? The answers lie just beyond the horizon, waiting to unfold in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Clara didn't stop walking until she was outside, the cool night air wrapping around her like a second skin. She leaned against the sleek, black car parked near the entrance, catching her breath and trying to steady her racing thoughts. The moment Alexander touched her arm had felt electric, as if some invisible thread connected them despite their vastly different worlds. But Clara wasn't ready to face that, not yet. Not when she still hadn't figured out why she'd come to this party in the first place. Earlier that day, life had thrown her a curveball she never saw coming. Her landlord had shown up at her tiny apartment unannounced, handing her an eviction notice with cold indifference. Clara had worked hard for years, juggling 2 jobs just to keep a roof over her head. But it wasn't enough. A string of unexpected expenses, car repairs, medical bills, had left her scrambling, and now she was paying the price. Angry and desperate, she grabbed the first outfit she could find after changing into something less worn out, not even realizing how torn her jeans were until she stepped into the upscale venue. What began as a mistake quickly turned into an act of defiance. If people wanted to judge her, fine, let them. But as much as Clara tried to convince herself She didn't care about what others thought. Alexander's presence lingered in her mind. There was something about him that unsettled her, not because he intimidated her, but because he seemed genuinely curious about who she was beneath the surface. Most men would have dismissed her outright or treated her like a charity case, but Alexander hadn't done either. Instead, his eyes held a question. Why are you here? And maybe, just maybe, there was another question buried deeper within. What can I learn from you? Back inside, Alexander stood frozen, watching Clara disappear through the doors. His jaw tightened as frustration bubbled beneath his composed exterior. He prided himself on being able to read people, to anticipate their moves and motivations. Yet Clara remained an enigma, slipping through his grasp every time he thought he understood her. It frustrated him, yes, but it also intrigued him more than he cared to admit. For once, he wasn't thinking about deals, contracts, or profit margins. All he could think about was finding her again. As the night wore on, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that Clara's arrival wasn't random. He started piecing together fragments of information, asking discreet questions among the guests. Some claimed they recognized her from somewhere, a diner downtown perhaps. Others insisted she must be an artist or activist, making some kind of statement. None of it added up though. Something about her story didn't fit neatly into the narratives people were crafting. That only fueled Alexander's determination to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, Clara wandered aimlessly along the dimly lit streets, replaying the events of the evening in her mind. She hated feeling vulnerable, exposed. Growing up poor in a city obsessed with wealth and status had taught her early on to guard herself fiercely. Vulnerability was weakness, and weakness got you nowhere. But tonight, surrounded by strangers who judged her based solely on appearances, she'd allowed herself to feel something she rarely let herself acknowledge. Anger mixed with hope. Anger at the unfairness of it all, and hope that maybe, just maybe, someone might see her differently. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She spun around, half expecting to see Alexander, but instead, it was a man she vaguely recognized from the party. He introduced himself as Daniel, one of Alexander's business associates. "You made quite the impression back there," he said with a smirk, his tone laced with mockery. Clara bristled, instinctively stepping back. Something about him felt off, predatory even. Before she could respond, he continued, "Alexander Drake doesn't usually chase after women like you. Must be your charm." The comment hit its mark, stinging more than Clara cared to admit. She forced a tight smile, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her discomfort. "I doubt Mr. Drake is interested in anything beyond curiosity," she replied coolly, turning to leave. But Daniel wasn't done. He grabbed her wrist, his grip firm. "Be careful, sweetheart. You don't know who you're dealing with." Fear shot through Clara, but she masked it with defiance. Yanking her arm free, she glared at him. "And you don't know who you're dealing with." With that, she turned and walked away, her heart pounding. She knew better than to trust anyone associated with Alexander's world, no matter how charming or intriguing they seemed. People like Daniel thrived on power dynamics, using intimidation to get what they wanted. Clara refused to play that game. Unbeknownst to her, Alexander had witnessed the entire exchange from afar. After losing track of Clara earlier, he'd followed her instinctively, driven by a mix of concern and curiosity. Watching Daniel corner her ignited a protectiveness in him he hadn't felt in years. Without hesitation, he strode toward them, his expression darkening. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice low and commanding. Daniel immediately released Clara's wrist, stepping back with a sheepish grin. "No problem, Alex. Just having a friendly chat." Alexander's gaze hardened. "Leave," he ordered, his tone leaving. No room for argument. Daniel hesitated for a moment before slinking away, muttering under his breath. Once he was gone, Alexander turned to Clara, his expression softening slightly. "Are you okay?" Clara nodded, though her hands trembled ever so slightly. "I'm fine," she said, avoiding his eyes. She hated feeling weak, especially in front of someone like him. But as much as she wanted to push him away, part of her was grateful he'd intervened. "Thank you," she added quietly, the words tasting strange on her tongue. Alexander studied her for a moment, noting the subtle tension in her posture. "You don't have to go through this alone," he said finally, his voice gentle but firm. Clara looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw something unexpected. Sincerity. For all his wealth and power, there was a vulnerability in his gaze that mirrored her own. It caught her off guard, forcing her to confront emotions she'd spent years burying. "I don't need saving," she replied, her voice steadier now. "But thank you for stepping in." The admission cost her, but it also felt liberating. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to lean on someone else. If only for a moment, their conversation deepened as they walked together, sharing pieces of their stories. Clara opened up about her struggles, her fight to survive in a world that often felt stacked against her. Alexander listened intently, surprising himself with how much he related to her resilience. In turn, he shared glimpses of his own past, the pressures of growing up in a family where success was measured in dollars and deals, the loneliness that came with living a life dictated by expectations. As dawn approached, the line between attraction and admiration blurred. They found themselves standing outside Clara's apartment building, neither wanting the night to end, but reality loomed large, casting shadows over the fragile connection they'd forged. Clara knew she couldn't rely on Alexander, or anyone, to fix her problems, and Alexander, for all his resources, couldn't shake the feeling that helping her might mean confronting parts of himself he'd rather leave buried. Just as they were about to part ways, a figure emerged from the shadows. Daniel, flanked by two burly men. "This isn't over," he sneered, his eyes gleaming with malice. Clara froze, fear gripping her chest. Alexander stepped in front of her instinctively, shielding her with his body. "Stay away from her," he growled, his voice dripping with authority. Daniel laughed, unfazed. Big words for a man who doesn't understand the stakes. With that, he tossed an envelope at Alexander's feet. Before disappearing into the night, Clara bent down to pick it up, her hands trembling as she opened it. Inside was a photograph of her, taken earlier that evening, along with a note scrawled in bold letters. "You're playing a dangerous game." The blood drained from Clara's face as she realized the implications. This wasn't just about her anymore. Whatever secrets lay hidden in Alexander's world, they were closing in, and she was caught right in the middle. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the photograph, her mind racing. The note wasn't just a threat. It was a warning that someone had been watching her, following her every move. She felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't since stepping into that party hours earlier. But what scared her most wasn't the danger lurking in the shadows. It was the realization that Alexander's world was far more complicated and dangerous than she'd imagined. Alexander snatched the envelope from her hands, his jaw clenched tight. He recognized Daniel's handwriting instantly. This wasn't The first time one of his associates had tried to intimidate someone close to him. But something about this felt different, more calculated. "Get inside," he ordered Clara, his voice low and urgent. "Now." She hesitated, torn between fear and defiance. "I'm not running," she said firmly, though her trembling hands betrayed her resolve. Alexander locked eyes with her, his expression softening for a brief moment. "You're not running," he agreed. "But you're not staying out here either. Please trust me." For reasons she couldn't fully explain, Clara nodded and stepped back toward the building. As much as she hated feeling like she needed protection, there was something about Alexander's tone, a mix of authority and genuine concern, that made her comply. Once she was safely inside, Alexander turned his attention back to the street, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. Whoever was behind this wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted, and he knew exactly what, or rather, who they were after. Back in her apartment, Clara paced the small living room, replaying everything that had happened since the party. It all seemed surreal, like some twisted game where the rules kept changing without warning. She thought about Alexander, the way he'd shielded her from Daniel, the way he listened when she spoke, as if her words mattered. For a man who lived in a world defined by power and control, he'd shown her an unexpected kindness. And now, because of her, he was being dragged into something potentially life-threatening. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door, heart pounding. She cracked it open to find Alexander standing there, his face grim. He held up his phone, showing her a text message. "Meet me tomorrow morning at the docks. Come alone." It was signed with a single initial. D. Clara swallowed. Hard, dread pooling in her stomach. "What does he want?" she whispered. "I don't know," Alexander admitted, his voice heavy with frustration. "But I'm not letting you go anywhere near him." His protectiveness surprised even himself. Normally, he handled threats with calculated precision, keeping emotions firmly in check. But this was different. Clara wasn't just another problem to solve. She was someone he cared about, whether he liked it or not. The next morning, Alexander devised a plan. He wouldn't let Clara face Daniel alone, no matter how risky it might be. Together, they drove to the docks, the tension between them palpable. Clara sat silently in the passenger seat, her mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. What if Daniel hurt Alexander? What if she ended up losing the only person who'd ever truly seen her? When they arrived, the scene was eerily quiet. Fog rolled off the water, shrouding the area in an unsettling haze. Daniel stood waiting, flanked by the same two men from the night before. His smirk widened as he saw them approach. "Didn't think you'd bring her," he said casually, nodding toward Clara. "Guess I underestimated your attachment." "Cut the games, Daniel," Alexander snapped, his patience wearing thin. "What do you want?" Daniel's grin faded, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. "You've been digging into things you shouldn't, Alex. Asking questions about deals long buried. And now, thanks to her," he gestured toward Clara, "you've painted a target on both your backs." Clara's heart sank. So this was about Alexander's past. Whatever secrets he'd uncovered must have rattled someone powerful enough to send Daniel after them. But before she could process it further, Daniel pulled out a gun, aiming it squarely at Alexander. "Last chance, Drake. Walk away, or we settle this right here." Time seemed to freeze. Clara instinctively stepped forward, placing herself between Alexander and the weapon. "Stop!" she shouted, her voice trembling but resolute. "This isn't about him, it's about me. Let him go." Daniel laughed, lowering the gun slightly. "Brave move, sweetheart. Too bad bravery doesn't pay the bills." Before anyone could react, Clara lunged at him, knocking the gun from his hand. Chaos erupted. as Alexander tackled Daniel to the ground while Clara fought off one of the henchmen. Adrenaline surged through her veins, pushing aside her fear. She may not have had money or connections, but she had survival instincts. And right now, those instincts screamed to fight back. Into the end, it was Alexander who disarmed the remaining attacker, pinning him down until backup arrived. Earlier, he'd called in favors from trusted allies, ensuring they wouldn't face Daniel alone. Within minutes, police sirens echoed in the distance, signaling the arrival of help. Daniel cursed under his breath, realizing he'd been outplayed. As officers cuffed him and his accomplices, Alexander pulled Clara into a tight embrace, his relief evident. Later, as they sat together in a quiet cafe, the weight of the morning's events began to sink in. Clara finally broke the silence. "Why did he come after us?" she asked softly. Alexander sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Years ago, I uncovered evidence of illegal dealings tied to my family's business. I walked away, thinking I'd left it all behind. Turns out, old enemies don't forget easily. And now," Clara pressed, searching his eyes. "And now," he replied, "I think it's time I stopped running too. If I want a future worth fighting for, I need to make peace with my past." Clara smiled faintly, feeling a glimmer of hope despite everything. For so long, she'd carried the scars of her own struggles, convinced she was better off alone. But meeting Alexander had changed something in her. He'd shown her that strength wasn't about facing battles solo. It was about finding someone willing to stand beside you. As they parted ways later that day, neither knew what the future held. But for the first time in years, they each felt a sense of possibility. Clara returned to her apartment, determined to rebuild her life on her own terms. And Alexander, inspired by her resilience, vowed to use his resources to help others trapped in similar circumstances. The story didn't end with fireworks or grand declarations. It ended quietly, with two people choosing to believe in second chances. Sometimes that's enough.